Hello there, it's Miss DiLullo. Today we are going to factor quadratics when a is equal to 1 in order to accomplish our goal, which is to use factoring to solve quadratic equations. Okay, our first problem, solve this quadratic equation. On the right, I'm going to list all of the steps that we are going to do to solve the problem. So let's start with step 1. The first thing is to write the quadratic equation in general form. And just a reminder that general form is f of x is equal to ax squared plus bx plus c. So right now our quadratic is in general form. Just a reminder that a is the coefficient in front of the x squared term, so a is equal to 1. B is the coefficient in front of the x term, so b is 16, and c is the constant, so c is 48. Okay, so step 2. Set f of x or y equal to 0. So we are going to replace f of x with a 0 and just rewrite the right side of our quadratic equation. So we have 0 equals x squared plus 16x plus 48. Okay, on to the next step. We are going to find two numbers whose product is equal to a times c and whose sum is equal to b. So what does that look like? So first we need to identify what a times c is. So we take our a value. Our a value is 1. We're going to multiply that a value by our c value, which is 48. So 1 times 48, and we're looking for two numbers that have the product equal to 48. Remember that the product is the solution to two factors being multiplied. So we'll make a little list of all of the factors that have a product of 48. On the right side of the list, we are going to add in those same two numbers who have a sum of our b term, which is positive 16. So first let's list the factors. We have positive 1 times positive 48. We can also have negative 1 times negative 48, which also equals positive 48. Going down to the 2's, we have 2 times 24 and negative 2 times negative 24. On to 3's, 3 times 16, negative 3 times negative 16. 4 times 12, negative 4 times negative 12. 6 times 8, and negative 6 times negative 8. And then we would be going back down the list the opposite way, so I'm going to stop here. So let's add these numbers together and find out which pair of numbers has a sum of 16. 1 plus 48 is 49. Negative 1 plus negative 48 is negative 49. 2 plus 24 is 26. Negative 2 plus negative 24 is negative 26. 3 plus 16 is 19. Negative 3 times negative 16 is negative 19. 4 plus 12 is 16. Negative 4 plus negative 12 is negative 16. 6 plus 8 is 14. And negative 6 plus negative 8 is negative 14. So, do we have a pair of numbers who multiply to positive 48 and add to positive 16? We do, with 4 and 12. So, in our next step, we are going to use those two numbers to rewrite our original equation by replacing the original b with our two new factors. So, we start with our 0 equals x squared. That's the beginning of our original equation. 0 equals x squared. Now we're going to completely replace this plus 16x. That plus 16x will replace with my two numbers that I got from my list down here. So we have plus 4x, plus 12x, and then finally the last term in our quadratic, which is plus 48. Now we have a quadratic equation with four terms, which we are going to solve by factoring by grouping now. So when you factor by grouping, you group the first two terms and the last two terms with the sign of the second term. So we have our first group as x squared plus 4x. So we need to see what we can factor out of x squared plus 4x. Well, if I divide out an x, I'm left with x plus 4 out of my first set of terms. Then out of my second set of parentheses over here, I can divide out a positive 12, which then leaves me with x plus 4. So now if you notice, I have two factors that are exactly the same, and that's what we need. If those numbers aren't the same, then we should go back and check our work. So since these are a common factor, that can be factored out front. So we have x plus 4, and then what's remaining after we factor out our factor of x plus 4? We have x plus 12. Finally, we are going to set each of our factors equal to 0 and then solve for x. So our first factor is x plus 4 is equal to 0, and our second, x plus 12, is equal to 0. We set these equal to 0 because we are using the zero product property. So we just subtract 4 for my first solution of x is equal to negative 4, and subtract 12 for my second solution of x is equal to negative 12. So we have x is equal to negative 4 and x is equal to negative 12. Let's try another one. In this example, our original quadratic equation is not in general form. So first we will need to subtract 7x and put that in the middle of our quadratic equation. So we have x squared minus 7x minus 30 is equal to 0. Since our quadratic equation is equal to 0, we can proceed to the AC method, which is multiplying my A term times my C term, finding the product of my A term times C term, which is negative 30, and the sum of my B term, which is negative 7. Let's list the factors of negative 30. We have negative 1 times 30, 1 times negative 30. Negative 2 times positive 15, 2 times negative 15. Negative 3 times 10, 3 times negative 10. Negative 5 times 6, 5 times negative 6, and that's it. So let's start adding up our sums. We have negative 1 plus 30 is positive 29. 1 plus negative 30 is negative 29. Negative 2 plus 15 is 13. Then we have negative 13, positive 7, positive 1, and negative 1. So what is our winning pair? We have 3 and negative 10 multiplies to equal negative 30 and adds to equal negative 7. So now we rewrite our quadratic equation with 4 terms by starting with the x squared term, replacing my b term with my two numbers from this list, plus 3x minus 10x, and then finally my c term at the end, minus 30 is equal to 0. Now that we have 4 terms, we can group off our first 2 terms and our last 2 terms. What do the first 2 terms have in common that can be divided out? Well, we can take out an x. We divide by x, we are left with x plus 3 on the inside. What do the second 2 terms have in common that can be divided out? Well, in the second set of terms, we have a negative coefficient here and a negative term here, but we want both of these numbers to be positive, so we are going to actually factor out a negative 10, so then when we divide by our negatives, that turns our x positive and 3 positive. X plus 3 is our common factor, so we factor that out and we're left with x minus 10. Now that we have our 2 factors, we set them each equal to 0 and solve for x. Subtracting 3, x is equal to negative 3, and adding 10, x is equal to positive 10. So those are our 2 solutions. Since this problem does not have a b term to start, we're going to write it in general form with our b term adding in a 0x. So let's start the process by finding the product of our a times c, which is negative 64, and our sum of our b term, which is 0. Let's list the factors of negative 64. Now we can add all of those numbers and we will find our sums. As we can see, we have a winner at the bottom. Negative 8 times positive 8 is 0. So we rewrite our expression by replacing our b term with our two factors from this list. Minus 8x plus 8x is minus 64 is equal to 0. Now we group our first two. Out of our first two terms, we can factor out an x. The second two terms, we can factor out a negative 8. So our two factors become x plus 8 and x minus 8 is equal to 0. Set each of these equal to 0 and then solve. So x is equal to negative 8 and x is equal to positive 8. This is actually a special type of factoring method called the difference of two squares, because both of our original terms were squares. So we can just go ahead, and once we know the square root of each term, we can go from the original equation to our two factors broken down with opposite signs. In this last example, we'll go ahead and start with our AC method, the product that will equal 1 times 4, which is negative 4, and the sum, which will be negative 3. Let's list our factors of 4. Okay, now let's add all those to find our sum. Well, actually, we don't have a sum that is equal to negative 3. In this case, this quadratic equation is not able to be factored, so we will call this prime. Okay, so that is all for factoring today. Go ahead and try the problems below this one and check your answers and make sure you ask a lot of questions the next day.